My name is Amanda Miller, and I was 28 years old when I realized blood doesn't guarantee belonging. Up until that point, I had believed in the power of shared memories, in Sunday dinners, in the sacred bond that ties generations together. I never expected that a simple text message, meant for someone else, would detonate my entire world. It happened a few weeks after my grandmother Eleanor passed away. Her death wasn't sudden, she had been battling chronic illness for years. But that didn't make losing her any easier. She had been my anchor when the rest of my world felt unsteady. The one person who never treated me as an afterthought. So when she was gone, the grief was like a fog I couldn't escape. That's when the message arrived. My cousin Rachel, in her usual flurry of backhanded coordination, accidentally included me in a group text. Will reading tomorrow. 2 p.m. Harrison's office. Don't tell Amanda. No context. No apology. Just silence after that. Seconds later, a follow-up message arrived. Oops, wrong thread. Disregard. I stared at my phone, heartbeat thudding in my ears. My fingers trembled. Hovering over the screen, rereading the words that had just sliced through me like glass. They were gathering, without me. Deliberately. My stomach sank like a stone in water. They didn't want me there, not even to say goodbye properly. I could have stayed home. Could have swallowed my pride and told myself the inheritance didn't matter, that I wasn't going to beg for scraps of acknowledgement from people who had always treated me like an outsider. But I kept thinking about Grandma's voice, steady, kind, unwavering. Never let anyone make you feel like you don't belong. I knew what I had to do. The morning of the will reading, I woke up before dawn. My apartment felt smaller than usual, walls closing in with tension. I dressed carefully in the navy blue dress Grandma always said brought out my eyes. No dramatic makeup. No flashy jewelry. Just dignity. Quiet defiance. The kind she had always admired. As I drove to the law office in downtown Boston, my palms left damp prints on the steering wheel. I rehearsed 1,000 different conversations in my head, each more confrontational than the last. But nothing prepared me for the moment those elevator doors opened. There they were, Aunt Judith in her designer trench coat, perfectly coiffed and already annoyed. Uncle Philip, posture stiff, scrolling through his phone like he had better places to be. Rachel and Nathan, whispering behind paper coffee cups, trying and failing to look surprised. Their faces said everything. They hadn't expected me to come. They were counting on my silence. Judith's voice cut through the air like a knife. Amanda? What exactly are you doing here? I lifted my chin. I'm here to hear my grandmother's final wishes. Philip's expression darkened. He took one step forward, physically blocking my path. You weren't asked to be here. You were left out for a reason. And what reason is that? I asked, not backing down. Rachel scoffed. This is for family. I smiled then, not with amusement, but with clarity. Last I checked, Eleanor was my grandmother, too. Before the verbal grenades could continue, the office door opened. An elderly man with silver hair and wire-framed glasses stepped out, holding a slim folder against his chest. Is everyone here for the Eleanor Miller estate? Aunt Judith moved quickly, adopting her signature faux charming tone. Yes, Mr. Harrison. But there's a bit of confusion. Amanda wasn't expected today. The lawyer's brows pulled together. Amanda Miller, he asked, glancing at the folder. Eleanor's granddaughter? That's correct, I said, then. She's very much supposed to be here. Every eye turned. Every muscle tightened. Even the air shifted. Mr. Harrison continued. In fact, he opened the file and adjusted his glasses with deliberate care. Her name is the only one listed in the document. The silence that followed didn't feel human, it felt surgical. Cold. Clinical. Like someone had paused the world mid-breath. Judith's jaw slackened. Philip's knuckles whitened as he gripped the armrest of his chair. Rachel blinked as though the words couldn't compute. And Nathan? He muttered something under his breath and reached for the water cooler. I beg your pardon? Uncle Philip finally managed, his voice trembling with disbelief. You heard correctly, Mr. Harrison replied, his tone professional but unmistakably firm. Eleanor Miller left her entire estate to Amanda Miller. There were no alternate beneficiaries listed. It was like watching a chandelier crash to the floor in slow motion. Shattered pride, broken expectations, and the glittering fragments of greed all at once. You're lying, Judith said, eyes wide. That can't be legal. Mr. Harrison didn't blink. It is. I've been Eleanor's attorney for over 3 decades. Her final wishes were documented meticulously and filed appropriately. She wasn't in her right mind, Philip barked. She was confused. No, Mr. Harrison said, calmly flipping a page. She was assessed by 3 independent neurologists in the final months of her life. All of them certified her cognitive clarity. She was fully capable of making this decision. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. I sat in the corner of the room, barely believing what I was hearing. But in the deepest part of my soul, I could feel her presence, strong, deliberate, prepared. She had known this moment would come, she had prepared for war, and somehow, I had been chosen as her sword. The words hung in the air like a thunderclap that no one could outrun, all of it. Rachel finally choked out, her voice cracking under the weight of disbelief. Mr. Harrison nodded without hesitation. Every asset, every account, every property, including the Beacon Hill residence, the lakefront home, and all accompanying investments, was explicitly left to Amanda. No one moved. It was as though gravity had shifted, and the center of the room was no longer Aunt Judith's manufactured grace or Uncle Philip's financial arrogance, but me. For a moment, I almost shrank beneath the weight of their stares. But then I remembered the countless evenings I'd spent at Grandma's side, brushing her hair or laughing over burnt cookies, the unspoken bond between us deeper than any shared surname. Judith stood abruptly. This must be some manipulation. She was vulnerable. We should consult another lawyer. This cannot be binding. Mr. Harrison didn't flinch. I anticipated this reaction. Eleanor did as well. In preparation, she compiled extensive documentation proving both her mental capacity and her independent decision-making process. I have notarized statements, video declarations, physician evaluations, every requirement legally covered. Philip leaned forward, seething. She must have pressured her. Amanda was always around, whispering in her ear. I was holding her hand, I said quietly. While you were calculating net returns. Judith's lips curled. You were keeping score. No, I replied, pulse steady. You were. I just showed up. Mr. Harrison cleared his throat. The will also includes a personal letter, addressed specifically to Amanda, which she may choose to share at her discretion. My hands trembled as he slid the envelope across the polished wood. The paper was heavy, her handwriting unmistakable, elegant cursive, deliberate and unmistakably hers. My fingers hesitated for a moment before slipping the flap open. The silence in the room grew louder with every second. I unfolded the letter and began to read, silently at first, but the tension in the room demanded air. My voice shook as I shared her words. My dearest Amanda, if you are reading this, I am no longer with you, but I hope my decision brings clarity and peace, even as it stirs resentment. I know the family will not understand, perhaps they will never understand, but I've been watching, listening, observing for years. Your presence in my life wasn't about obligation or appearances. You came because you cared. You showed up not with expectations, but with patience. You never asked me for anything. You brought groceries, baked my favorite cookies, listened when I needed to talk. You reminded me what kindness feels like. That's something no amount of inheritance can buy. The others, bless them, lost themselves in appearances, gifts instead of presents, titles instead of compassion. I tested all of you, intentionally. I mentioned valuables in passing, dropped hints about the estate, and watched reactions. You were the only one who didn't change. I've chosen you not just because you loved me, but because I trust what you'll do with what I've left behind. With all my heart, Grandma Eleanor. When I finished reading, the conference room no longer felt like a battleground, it felt like a courtroom where the verdict had already been rendered. Aunt Judith's mascara streaked across her cheekbones. She shook her head slowly. She's been deceived. She must have been confused. She wasn't, I replied firmly, sliding the letter back into the envelope. She was deliberate. She was clear. Philip's voice rose, brittle and venomous. You think this makes you special? You think a letter and a signature makes you better than the rest of us? I don't need a letter to tell me who I am, I said. But apparently, you do. Mr. Harrison interjected, his tone professional once again. Before anyone considers disputing the will, please be aware that Eleanor retained independent evaluators, digital backups, and even audiovisual documentation. Any attempt to contest will be swiftly shut down. Her intentions were unambiguous. Philip's face flushed crimson. We'll see what a judge has to say. Mr. Harrison folded his hands. We already have, Mr. Miller. And he'll say the same thing. Eleanor said with every ounce of clarity she had left. Amanda is the sole heir. Rachel pushed back her chair with a screech and stormed toward the hallway. Nathan followed, more stunned than angry, like a man who had bet his future on a house that no longer stood, that left Judith and Philip, still anchored to their chairs. As if movement would confirm defeat. I rose. I didn't come here to gloat, I said. I didn't expect anything. But I won't apologize for being loved. Judith's voice wavered. You don't know what it's like to feel left behind. No. I said gently. But you're about to. And then I left them sitting in that oak-paneled room, surrounded by illusions of control that had finally crumbled. Walking out of that office should have felt like victory. Instead, it felt like exile. The stares that followed me weren't just angry, They were surgical, dissecting every step, every breath, like I had no right to exist in their carefully crafted world anymore. And maybe I never had. Maybe I was just the shadow they couldn't erase, the reminder that love can't be bought and legacy doesn't always follow bloodlines, but I didn't cry. Not in the elevator. Not in the car. Not even when I stepped back into my tiny apartment, where the floorboards creaked in familiar protest and the walls still smelled faintly of cinnamon from a batch of cookies I never finished baking the day Grandma died. I sat down. Her letter still clutched in my hand, and replayed every moment, her voice in the garden. The warm pressure of her palm on mine. That night she said, "Amanda, I see how everyone moves when they think I'm not looking." She'd known. For years, and yet, it wasn't until 3 years earlier that the first visible cracks began splintering through our family's illusion of harmony. It started with a family meeting, summoned by Uncle Philip under the guise of care coordination. I remember the unease that twisted in my stomach when I arrived at Grandma's home and saw a real estate agent sipping coffee in the parlor. "We're exploring practical options," Philip had said, gesturing toward the agent like she was part of some charity outreach. "The lake house hasn't been used consistently in years. It's draining resources." The lake house, that wasn't just a vacation spot, it was history. A century-old refuge nestled in New Hampshire where Grandma had spent every summer since girlhood. Where she taught me how to skip stones, where we caught fireflies in mason jars and whispered secrets beneath patchwork quilts. "Has Grandma agreed to this?" I asked, scanning her expression. Her lips were sealed in a polite smile, but her knuckles were white around the teacup she held. "She understands it's time to be realistic," Philip insisted, brushing off my concern like lint on his tailored blazer. "No," I countered, my voice low but steady. "She told me last week. She planned to spend July there." Judith's eyes narrowed. "Amanda, sweetie, perhaps you misunderstood." Grandma set down her teacup with deliberate care. "I did say that to Amanda. And I haven't authorized any sale." The agent nearly dropped her brochure. Within seconds, she excused herself, leaving behind a silence thick enough to choke on. Philip turned on me as soon as the door closed. "You're always interfering. You think proximity makes you wise?" "No," I replied, holding his gaze. "I think Grandma deserves the dignity of deciding for herself." He didn't respond. Not with words. But later that evening, while clearing dishes in the kitchen, he cornered me. "You think she loves you more," he hissed. "But all you've done is leech time and sympathy. This isn't your story, Amanda. Don't try to rewrite it." "Maybe not," I said. But I refused to be edited out of hers. From that night forward, the quiet campaign began. It was subtle at first. Omitted invitations. Sideways glances. Conversations that fell silent when I entered the room. Family photos. Circulated in group chats where my name didn't appear. Rachel started using phrases like "gold digger" under her breath, loud enough to be overheard but never direct. Thanksgiving came and went. I was seated at the far end of the table, next to the dishwasher and behind a pillar, while Philip gave a toast about tradition and unity. Christmas that year? I received a text from Judith. "Mother needs rest. We're keeping it small this season. Thanks for understanding." Translation: "Don't come." I later saw photos online. Candles, laughter. Everyone gathered around Grandma in a red velvet armchair. Everyone but me. I called her the next day. "You weren't there," I said quietly. There was a pause on the line. "You weren't invited?" she asked, voice barely above a whisper. "No." Another silence. "I didn't know," she finally said. I assumed. She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. Assumptions had become the currency of our family. Easier than truth, cheaper than apologies. The final straw came when they started controlling her access. Suddenly, I was told I could only visit Sunday afternoons, 2 hours, no exceptions. Other family members began showing up accidentally during my designated slot, derailing private conversations with superficial chatter and distractions. It wasn't about Grandma's comfort. It was about containment, but I didn't give up. I brought lunch on my days off. I called the home health aide, Maria, and asked for updates. I dropped off her favorite tea when I knew she'd be alone. I became the background noise they couldn't mute, the presence they failed to erase, and through it all, Grandma remained herself, sharp, wry, observant. She never spoke ill of them. But she didn't have to point. One afternoon, as I tucked a blanket around her legs, she reached up and brushed a strand of hair from my forehead. "You know, Amanda, it's not what people say that reveals them, it's what they assume you'll never notice." I nodded, even if I didn't yet understand the full weight of her words. The last Christmas before Grandma passed was the moment I stopped hoping they'd change. It started with a message, predictable, sterile, and laced with false kindness. "We're keeping the holidays intimate this year. Mother needs quiet. Thank you for understanding." No invitation. No location. Not even a time. Judith had written it, of course. Her phrasing was always like that, cold-wrapped in politeness. But the real message was simple: "You're not welcome." I didn't respond. What could I have said? I spent that Christmas Eve in my apartment, candles lit, cookies baking in the oven just to replicate the smell that used to fill Grandma's kitchen. The silence was heavy. Not peaceful, not comforting, just thick with the realization that I had been boxed out entirely. Then I thought of Maria. She had always been kind, discreet, and loyal to Grandma, even when the rest of the family treated her like a ghost. I texted her. "Can you stop by Grandma's tomorrow? I have something for her." That evening, I packed a small gift bag, homemade spice cookies from our shared recipe, a soft shawl in her favorite cornflower blue, and a photo album I had been assembling for months. Inside were pictures from the lake house, snapshots of birthday dinners, Polaroids from the garden we used to tend together. Each page was a timeline of real love, not performance, not appearances. I handed the bag to Maria the next morning with tears in my eyes. She deserves to feel remembered, even if I'm not there to say it. Maria hugged me tightly. "You're still her heartbeat, Amanda. Don't forget that." That night, I scrolled through social media and saw the truth they never bothered to hide. Rachel had posted a boomerang video of champagne glasses clinking, Nathan tagged himself at Philip's address, and in the background of a group photo stood Grandma, small, frail, and surrounded by people who called it caring. They called it intimate. But it was everyone but me. The exclusion wasn't passive anymore. It was intentional. Strategic. Like erasing me from the family frame one cropped corner at a time. When Grandma passed in April, I didn't hear it from Judith. Or Philip. Or any cousin. Maria called me, voice trembling, holding back sobs. "She's gone, Amanda." I dropped to the floor of my living room, unable to process the silence that followed. She had slipped away without me by her side. I should have been there. I should have held her hand, but I wasn't even allowed in the room. By the time I reached the house, the vultures were already circling. Judith and Philip stood by the fireplace speaking to a funeral director in hushed, performative tones. Their postures were perfect, somber, rehearsed, deliberate. "Oh, Amanda," Judith said with feigned surprise. "We were just about to reach out." Were they? The funeral was a parade of hierarchy. I was seated in the third row, behind cousins who hadn't visited in years, behind out-of-town relatives who hadn't bothered to send cards on her birthday. The officiant mispronounced her maiden name. The floral arrangements were ostentatious. And the eulogy? Delivered by Philip, of course, filled with business anecdotes, financial legacies, and mentions of her late husband's empire. Not one mention of her gardens. Not a word about her laughter or her stubborn streak or her unmatched spice cookies. Not a single acknowledgement of the woman I actually knew. I sat there, barely breathing, watching them polish a version of her that never truly existed. A hollow porcelain statue, carefully scrubbed of the inconvenient details that made her beautiful. When it ended, I walked straight out. I didn't linger. I didn't shake hands. I didn't accept their condolences. I just left. 2 weeks later. While cooking dinner, my phone lit up again. It was Rachel. The text was short, accidental, and just as revealing as the one before. "Reading tomorrow at Harrison's. 2 p.m. Mom says don't tell Amanda." Then, 1 minute later, wrong thread. Disregard. I stood frozen in my kitchen, spatula still in my hand, sauce bubbling over on the stove. For a moment, the world tilted. Déjà vu, but sharper this time. They were doing it again. Only this time, Grandma wasn't here to protect me. Or so I thought. That night, I didn't sleep. I just stared at the ceiling, wrestling with every instinct. Should I let it go? Should I rise above, take the moral high road, pretend I didn't care? But that voice, hers, echoed in the back of my mind. "You belong anywhere I want you to be." I took the next day off from work. Put on the dress she always said made me look like someone ready for anything. I brushed my hair the way she used to when I was 10, parting it neatly, taming the wild strands. I wasn't going for the money. I was going because love deserves witnesses. Even in death, the law office was in an old brick building in Beacon Hill. The kind of place that smelled like wood polish and old decisions. As I stepped out of the elevator, I saw them, the same faces, same surprise, same offense. Rachel's eyes went wide, Nathan muttered under his breath, Philip clenched his jaw. Judith stood. "What are you doing here?" she asked, all pretense stripped away. "I'm here to honor Grandma," I replied. "This is her final wish." "You weren't invited," Philip snapped. "I don't need your permission," I said, walking past them toward the receptionist. "Miss Miller?" the receptionist asked. "Yes. You're on the list. Right this way." Behind me, I could feel the temperature in the hallway drop 10 degrees. The whispering began before the door even closed. They thought I'd stay quiet. They thought I'd let them rewrite everything, but they'd forgotten something critical. I was Eleanor Miller's granddaughter. The conference room was too elegant for what was about to happen. Polished mahogany, High-backed leather chairs, cream walls lined with oil paintings, everything in this place screamed civility, respectability, prestige. But behind the facade, I could already feel the air souring. The tension wasn't subtle, it was crawling. Across the walls like static. I took the nearest seat near the entrance, keeping a slight distance from the others. They clumped together like a frightened herd, whispering in corners, eyes darting between each other and me like I was an intruder, not family. Mr. Harrison stepped in moments later, closing the door behind him. His presence was composed, commanding. He carried a large leather folder in one hand and a small stack of envelopes in the other. "Thank you all for coming," he began. "Before we begin, I'd like to state, on record, that Eleanor Catherine Miller was of sound mind and legal capacity when she drafted and finalized this will." Aunt Judith cleared her throat. Loudly. He glanced up but didn't pause. She was independently assessed by 3 neurologists over the course of 18 months. Their evaluations, available in notarized form, confirm her full cognitive function. "She wasn't well," Philip interrupted, tone clipped. "You saw her. She barely remembered birthdays." "She remembered everything," I said quietly. Not even looking at him. "Especially who made an effort." Judith leaned forward. "Mr. Harrison, I think you should know, most of the estate has already been discussed among the family. We didn't want to waste your time with trivialities." "Trivialities," he echoed, raising an eyebrow. She smiled tightly. "Amanda wasn't informed because we didn't expect her to be involved." Harrison nodded, a small, deliberate movement. "And that," he said, "was your first mistake." He opened the folder and slid a single page to the center of the table. The official seal glinted under the chandelier's warm light. "This document is Eleanor Miller's final, binding testament. Signed, witnessed, and archived per Massachusetts state law. It supersedes all prior versions." Rachel leaned in, blinking rapidly. Nathan's jaw tightened. Philip shifted in his seat. Mr. Harrison adjusted his glasses and began to read. "I, Eleanor Catherine Miller, being of sound mind and full mental clarity, do hereby declare this my last will and testament." The preamble went on, legal phrasing, asset classifications, revocations of prior documents, but the real thunder came moments later. "To my granddaughter, Amanda Rose Miller, I bequeath the entirety of my estate, real and liquid, including but not limited to all residential properties, vacation homes, investment accounts, family heirlooms, and intellectual property." There was a moment of stunned paralysis, then the sound of glass shattering. Rachel had dropped her water. "No one moved to clean it up." "What?" Judith whispered, eyes wide. "No. That can't be right." Philip bolted upright. "You're mistaken." "I assure you, I'm not," Mr. Harrison replied, sliding a second page across the table. "This is the signed statement from Eleanor herself, along with video confirmation." "She wasn't thinking clearly," Nathan muttered. "She must have been confused." Harrison opened a smaller envelope and retrieved a notarized letter. She anticipated this response. Eleanor was aware of potential objections and took every precaution to ensure her intent could not be challenged. Judith's voice cracked. "After everything we did? The dinners, the appointments, you showed up when there were guests," I said. "You brought designer scarves and left before tea cooled. I brought soup and stayed until she fell asleep." Mr. Harrison interjected again, this time with unmistakable steel behind his words. "Miss Miller," he said, looking directly at me, "your grandmother left behind a personal letter addressed to you. She requested that you read it first. However, she granted you discretion on whether to share it." He slid the envelope across the table. Her handwriting hit me like a whisper. "Amanda, if you're holding this, then I'm gone, and the chaos has begun. I know they're angry. I know they think I've betrayed them. But I didn't. I just finally told the truth with my actions." My hands trembled. I looked up. Every eye was glued to me. They wanted to see me falter. They wanted me to crumble under the weight of being chosen. I didn't. I unfolded the letter fully and began to read aloud. I watched. For years, I watched. Birthdays came and went. Holidays blurred together. They arrived late, left early, and only asked about my health when it impacted their plans. But you? You asked about my day. You brought me daisies. You sat in the garden and talked about the birds. Rachel's tears were now shameless, streaking mascara down her cheeks. "They think this is punishment. It's not. It's a reward, for presence, for patience, for love without expectation. You gave me dignity. That's worth more than any portfolio." I stopped reading. My voice wouldn't hold. Mr. Harrison picked up from where I left off. "There's more," he said. "Eleanor catalogued everything, visits, conversations, missing belongings. She also installed surveillance cameras inside the house 2 years ago." "What?" Philip blurted. She kept logs of who came and went, who took what, and where it ended up. Some of those items have been publicly documented. Rachel wore her tennis bracelet to a charity auction. Philip, your office displays paintings taken from the lake house. Judith, the Tiffany lamp is currently listed in your home's Zillow staging. Photos. Judith's mouth fell open. She was spying on us? She was protecting herself, I said. From you. Mr. Harrison reached into his folder again. All unauthorized removals must be returned within 30 calendar days or legal proceedings will be initiated. Legal? Nathan echoed. Criminal, Harrison clarified. Eleanor retained a separate litigation attorney to pursue theft and fraud claims, should that become necessary. Philip stood abruptly. This isn't over. Mr. Harrison didn't flinch. Actually, it is. And in that moment, I finally understood. Grandma hadn't just left me her home or her savings, she left me a war chest. She built a fortress out of facts, receipts, videos, and memories, every brick a moment where I showed up and they didn't. Every wall fortified with her quiet awareness. Every defense crafted to shield me from the storm she knew would follow. This wasn't a gift, it was armor. The air outside the law office was crisp, but it did nothing to cool the fire raging in my chest. I stepped into the street clutching Grandma's letter and the official documentation like a shield. It was done. Signed. Sealed. Delivered. I was the heir. Not just legally, but fully, indisputably chosen. And yet, as I walked through Boston's narrow brick-lined streets back to my apartment, I didn't feel victorious. I felt hollow. I hadn't fought for fortune. I'd shown up because love deserved recognition. But love had been met with suspicion. Devotion had earned me accusations. And even now, I knew this wasn't the end.as if on cue. My phone buzzed before I'd even taken off my coat. Block number. I let it go to voicemail, then another. This one showed Judith's name. Then Rachel. Then Nathan. Then an unknown number. Then 3 more in rapid succession. My voicemail filled up in under 2 hours. The texts followed. Some veiled. Others blatantly aggressive. You know this wasn't what she wanted. We took care of her. You manipulated her. You think this is over? Watch yourself. I stopped reading after the 15th. Silence felt safer. I powered off my phone, tossed it onto the kitchen table, and collapsed onto the sofa, clutching Grandma's letter like it could keep the storm outside. But even in her absence, she was still protecting me. The next morning, I went to the house. My house now. That phrase still didn't feel real. I stood on the porch for a moment, hand hovering over the doorknob. I'd used that entrance dozens of times, carrying groceries, delivering birthday flowers, walking Grandma back from physical therapy appointments. But today felt different. Permanent. Sacred. Final. The key still fit. The lock clicked open and the house was wrong. Something was missing. Not just emotionally, physically. I walked into the foyer and immediately noticed the hallway clock was gone. The antique one that chimed unevenly at the hour, the one Grandma had insisted was quirky, not broken. I moved deeper into the house. The shelves were stripped bare. Picture frames sat without photographs. Her favorite chair was missing the Afghan that had always draped over its arm. The cabinet that once displayed her delicate crystal collection now held only empty velvet stands. Panic set in room by room. I moved faster, hands trembling, stomach in knots. The jewelry box on her vanity had been emptied. Her spice rack had been gutted. Even the old recipe binder was gone. They hadn't just taken valuables. They'd erased her. They had removed every trace of her existence that didn't come with a monetary figure attached. It was surgical. Intentional. I sank onto the edge of her bed, my bed, technically, staring at the bare mattress. The hand-stitched quilt from her mother was missing. The framed wedding photo once hung above the dresser had been removed. They had already scavenged the memories. Tears spilled over before I realized I was crying. I sat in that silence for a long time, breath shallow, chest tight. I wasn't mourning the missing furniture or stolen heirlooms. I was grieving the violation. The theft of love that can't be appraised or insured. Eventually, I stood. She hadn't just left me vulnerable. She'd left instructions. I remembered something she'd once said while we were drinking tea in the garden. If anything happens to me and the vultures come circling, you'll know where to look. You'll know because I made sure you would. It had felt cryptic at the time. Now it felt like a map. I returned to her bedroom and opened the closet. Shoved the hanging clothes aside. Nothing. Then I dropped to my knees. There it was, tucked behind a row of old shoe boxes. A small safe. I stared at it for a long moment before trying the obvious. Her birthday. Click. Inside, a leather-bound journal. 3 USB drives, a stack of labeled CDs, and a folded envelope. On the envelope, for Amanda. Use if necessary. I sat cross-legged on the floor and opened the journal. Her handwriting filled every page, neat, consistent, methodical. Each entry was a timestamped record of family visits, offhand comments, missing items, suspicious behaviors. Every page built a case. Judith brought Rachel today. She chatted loudly about donation drives while Rachel wandered upstairs. Bracelet missing from box afterward. Philip spent 10 minutes asking about prescriptions. Then an hour suggesting we sell the lake house. Grew agitated when I declined. Nathan hinted again about the silverware being wasted on an empty dining room. I haven't hosted a dinner party in 5 years, but apparently, they're already planning theirs. I turned the pages slowly, breath catching on every line. This wasn't paranoia, this was proof each incident was backed by date, context, and reaction. Even her own moments of doubt were logged with clarity. Still love them, she had written once. But I can't ignore what I see. I plugged one of the USB drives into my laptop. Inside were folders filled with photographs, rooms fully furnished, items in place, timestamped screenshots. Before and after comparisons. Even some security footage, still images from hallway cameras, then came the audio clips, their voices, caught mid-conversation. Discussing how to simplify her estate. Complaining about my visits. Laughing about taking things, before she forgets they were ever there. One clip stood out immediately. Philip's voice, she won't even notice if that painting's gone. She's basically a placeholder at this point. I shut the laptop with a trembling breath. I'd seen enough, she hadn't just anticipated. Betrayal. She'd documented it, and she'd left it all to me. By the time I closed Grandma's journal and backed up the USB contents to my personal cloud, the fog of grief had shifted into something sharper, focus, a clarity, direction. She hadn't just protected her memories, she had prepared an arsenal. And now, it was my job to use it. I dialed Mr. Harrison first. His voice was calm, but his tone immediately shifted when I mentioned the contents of the safe. She documented everything, I told him. Dates, conversations, photos, footage. There's even recorded audio. He exhaled heavily. Then you're not just defending an inheritance. You're wielding a legacy. He connected me with the litigation attorney Eleanor had retained in secret, Sarah Donovan. The name alone carried weight in Boston's legal circles. I'd heard stories, firms backing down mid-trial, corporate giants folding under pressure, all because Sarah had taken the case. When I walked into her office 2 days later, she didn't shake hands. She simply pointed at the files I was carrying. Show me, she said. For an hour, she reviewed the journal entries, scanned the digital folders, and played select audio segments. After one clip of Judith berating a caregiver over having to make her own tea, Sarah pressed pause. Her expression was unreadable. This isn't just an inheritance dispute, she said finally. This is textbook manipulation. Psychological pressure. Theft. I don't want to drag them through the mud, I whispered. But they've already taken so much. She nodded slowly. You're not dragging anyone. You're holding up a mirror. That afternoon, she began issuing cease and desist letters to every relative who had removed belongings from Eleanor's properties. Each letter was accompanied by an itemized list of the removed objects, photo documentation, and a return deadline. Philip received a 5-page demand: paintings, antique tools, framed certificates, vintage stock documents. Judith got 3 separate notices: jewelry, silver sets, heirloom scarves, even Grandma's crystal salt shakers. Rachel's list included Grandma's sapphire earrings and the stolen bracelet she'd flaunted at a fundraiser 2 months earlier. Each envelope was stamped with one line in bold: failure to comply will result in formal legal proceedings, including, but not limited to, criminal charges. The next day, Uncle Philip filed a lawsuit: undue influence, testamentary incapacity. He claimed I had manipulated an elderly woman for financial gain. Sarah didn't flinch. We expected this, she said. Let's bury it before it breathes. She filed a motion to dismiss, attaching over 300 pages of evidence, neurological evaluations, timestamped footage, signed affidavits from Eleanor's care team, and screenshots of Rachel wearing items she had claimed never to touch. But that wasn't all. We uploaded the video files. 17 separate recordings, each featuring Grandma, seated in her favorite wingback chair, speaking directly into the camera with full awareness and zero hesitation. In 1, she said, this decision isn't cruel. It's corrective. My family had every opportunity to be kind, present, honest. Amanda was the only one who never asked for anything. So I'm giving her everything. In another, I've reviewed my records. I've watched the footage. I've consulted experts. And I've made peace with what this choice will cause. Amanda deserves the life I wish I had when I was her age. When Sarah finished reviewing the final clip, she leaned back, her expression stone. This isn't a defense strategy, she said. This is a declaration. But the legal pushback wasn't the only battle. Judith began calling my employer, the hospice center. whispering doubts about my professionalism, questioning my time management, suggesting I had fabricated time spent with grandma while neglecting patients. Within days, I was pulled into the director's office. Amanda, she began cautiously. I know these accusations aren't true. But this is becoming disruptive. I told her everything, about the lawsuit, the recordings, the surveillance. She nodded and handed me a folder. Take 2 weeks. Paid leave. Handle what needs to be handled. I walked out, relief warring with dread. I wanted this to end, but I wasn't naive enough to believe it would. The turning point came on a Thursday afternoon. Sarah called unexpectedly. Her voice sounded different, lighter. They cracked. Philip's attorney had requested mediation. They've seen the footage. They've read the letters. They know they don't stand a chance in court. Still, we prepared. We compiled affidavits from grandma's nurses, therapists, and even Maria, the home health aide who had loved Eleanor like a second mother. Each testimony painted the same picture. Amanda was present. The rest were absent. Dismissive, or calculating. Maria's affidavit included a personal log, 64 visits in grandma's final year. Philip had 7. Judith? 9. Rachel and Nathan? 3 combined, each one tied to a holiday meal. That Friday, we gathered in Sarah's conference room. Philip, red-faced and tired, flanked by a silent lawyer. Judith, pale and twitchy, clutching a leather notebook she never opened. Rachel and Nathan tried to look indifferent but kept glancing at the door. Sarah pressed play on the first video. Grandma filled the screen. If they're watching this, it means Amanda followed through. Good. She always finishes what she starts. Judith burst into tears. Philip stood up halfway through, but Sarah didn't pause. The truth was non-negotiable. The silence that followed grandma's final video wasn't empty, it was judgmental. A verdict delivered without a gavel. Philip didn't speak. He didn't look at anyone. He just sat there, shoulders hunched, as though the weight of his own behavior had finally sunk into his bones. Rachel wept. Whether from shame or shock, I didn't know. Maybe both. Maybe neither. Judith stared at the floor. Sarah closed her laptop and folded her hands. Now that we're all aligned on the truth, she said, her voice razor sharp, let's discuss resolution. Philip's attorney cleared his throat, sounding more like a man begging for leniency than advocating for a client. We're open to dropping the challenge. No further court involvement. But there are concerns about public perception, reputation. Sarah blinked slowly. Oh, you're worried about optics now. No press, the lawyer added hastily. A quiet end. We can consider that, Sarah replied, if, within 7 days, all of Eleanor's missing possessions are returned. Every item, every document, every keepsake, and every attempt to discredit Amanda ceases immediately. Philip opened his mouth. Sarah cut him off. We have video proof. Inventory logs. Affidavits. If you so much as blink the wrong way, we'll file criminal theft charges across 3 counties. Rachel hiccuped a sob. Nathan looked like he might be sick. Judith finally spoke, voice shaky. And if we comply? Sarah didn't flinch. Then the lawsuit is dropped. The estate remains intact. Amanda moves forward. Philip leaned back in his chair, face pale. You can't expect us to just walk away with nothing. No. I said softly. I expect you to walk away with what you brought into Grandma's life. And what's that? He hissed. Nothing. The room cracked with tension. Rachel suddenly stood. I just want this to be over. Judith wiped her face, not meeting my eyes. We'll return what we have. What they had. What they took. What they thought I'd never notice missing. The next week was like watching a strange kind of justice play out in real time. Moving vans arrived at Grandma's house in shifts. Quiet, efficient workers unloaded crates, bubble-wrapped heirlooms, velvet boxes, framed portraits, antique silver, recipe books, even that quirky hallway clock I thought I'd never see again. The missing Afghan returned, sealed in plastic. The sapphire earrings? Hand-delivered by courier. Her crystal set? Reassembled, perfectly arranged. No apology notes. No acknowledgements. Just silence and cardboard. I didn't expect apologies. I expected closure. A few days later, my phone rang. For once, it wasn't from a blocked number. Judith. I hesitated. Then answered. Amanda, she began, sounding like someone navigating unfamiliar terrain. I saw the video. I waited. Your grandmother, she really did see everything, didn't she? She always did, I said. We thought you were manipulating her. No, I replied calmly. You thought love had to be strategic. You forgot what sincerity looks like. There was a long pause. I'm sorry, Judith whispered. For excluding you. For not seeing what she saw. I said nothing. I don't expect forgiveness, she continued. But if there's ever a way to repair the damage, I cut her off gently. There's a way. But it won't start with excuses. Click. Later that evening, I sat in Grandma's living room, now my sanctuary. The walls no longer echoed with absence. The bookshelves were full again. Her slippers rested by the fireplace. The photograph from her wedding was back above the mantel. It was like she'd never been erased, and maybe that was the real victory. A week passed, then another. The court officially closed the probate case. All challenges withdrawn. Assets formally transferred. My name now owned every deed, every account, every family artifact. I had won, but it didn't feel like triumph. It felt like responsibility. So, I made a decision. I called each relative individually, yes, even the ones who'd hurt me most, and offered one choice. They could select a single item from Grandma's belongings, not the valuable pieces, not the things behind glass, but something meaningful. A memory. A chance to reclaim something human. Some declined. Too proud. Too angry. Too broken, but a few surprised me. Rachel asked for the recipe book. She taught me to make snickerdoodles once, she said quietly. I was 7. She said I cracked the eggs wrong but still let me finish the batch. Nathan requested Grandpa's fishing tackle box. He took me out once before he got sick. I remember thinking the worms were terrifying and he just laughed. Judith asked for a watercolor Grandma painted in her 20s. A lake at sunset. Soft brush strokes. Untouched. By time she showed it to me when I was pregnant with Rachel, Judith admitted. Said it reminded her that peace didn't always look loud. Each item they chose held no market value, but those things carried truth, and truth is what they had avoided for years. Weeks passed, not the kind that disappear unnoticed, but the kind you feel, heavy with decisions, lightened by clarity. The kind where every day you do something that shifts the future, even just a little. The inheritance was official now. Titles transferred. Accounts accessible. Lawyers satisfied. But the numbers, the assets, the documents. None of that compared to the house. Grandma's home wasn't just real estate. It was story. It was memory, and now, it was mine to protect, and evolve. I started slow. Her furniture stayed. The dining room remained intact. Her floral china lived. In the same cabinet. But here and there, I introduced myself to the space. A meditation corner in the sunroom, fresh bookshelves stocked with palliative care literature and novels she never got to read, wind chimes on the porch, handmade by hospice. Patients I'd cared for. The house wasn't shrinking into a museum. It was breathing again. One rainy afternoon, while sorting paperwork from Grandma's old writing desk, I stumbled across something I'd somehow missed. A sealed envelope. My name was written on the front in her unmistakable cursive, but this one said, for Amanda. After everything is settled. My throat tightened as I broke the seal. Inside was a handwritten letter. My dearest girl, if you're reading this, the storm has passed. And knowing our family, it was probably a Category 5 hurricane with silverware. Flying in accusations louder than firecrackers. I need to tell you something I couldn't include in any legal document. This wasn't about punishment. Not really. It was about trust. You carry your father's heart. That same gentle strength. That same clarity of right and wrong. And that's why I knew you were the one to hold this family's truth, not just its assets. Wealth doesn't destroy people. But it reveals them. And you? You stayed the same when it would have been easier to pretend. Use what I've given you. Build what we talked about. Take that trip to Italy. Start that hospice program. And when you're ready, if the family ever grows soft enough, open the door, just a little. Not because they deserve it. But because grace is your inheritance, too. I love you. I see you. I'm proud of you. Always, Grandma Eleanor. Tears streamed down my face as I read and reread her words. It wasn't about titles or furniture. It was about being seen. Fully. Unconditionally. Even when the rest of the world had looked away. That month, I filed the paperwork to establish the Eleanor Miller Foundation. Its mission? To support elder individuals with no family advocates. To fund palliative programs in underserved communities. To train future caregivers who treat dignity as non-negotiable. I allocated a substantial portion of the estate's liquid assets toward its launch. Not for tax reasons. Not for reputation. But because I had the means to give someone what Grandma gave me, a place. A voice. A shield. The foundation's first initiative was a scholarship fund for nursing students pursuing hospice care. The first recipient? A young woman named Claire, who had cared for her great-aunt alone while working 2 jobs and studying at night. She reminded me of you, Maria said when we met Claire at the grant ceremony. Maria.my last link to Grandma. That still existed in real time. She stood beside me as we handed Claire the award. She squeezed my hand afterward. She'd be thrilled, she whispered. But not surprised. Healing, I learned, doesn't always arrive as reconciliation. Sometimes, it arrives in strange, delicate forms, like unexpected phone calls or fragile attempts at apology. Rachel reached out first, coffee at a quiet cafe downtown. She came alone. No dramatic entrance, no rehearsed lines. She brought photos of her newborn daughter. I named her Eleanor, she said, avoiding eye contact. I want her to know who our grandmother really was. Not just the version I clung to when it was convenient. I nodded, unsure of what to say. I was angry, she admitted. But you weren't wrong. We sat in silence for a while before I finally spoke. She didn't choose me to punish you. She chose me because I showed up. I know, she whispered. That's why I'm here. Nathan sent a wedding invitation. I didn't expect it. I nearly didn't attend. But when I arrived, he introduced me to his fiancée as my cousin Amanda, who runs the Eleanor Miller Foundation. That was it, not a hug. Not a speech, but acknowledgement. That's how healing sometimes starts, quiet, without applause. Even Judith sent a Christmas card. No flowers. No gifts. Just a handwritten note, you're honoring her well. Coming from Judith, that was practically a hymn, but not everyone changed. Philip never reached out. I saw him once, in passing, at a fundraiser the foundation sponsored. He looked thinner, older, like he'd lost more than he wanted to admit. We locked eyes. He turned away, some roots rot too deep to save, and yet, I left the door unlocked, because that's what Grandma would have done, not to invite chaos, but to make sure no one could ever say they hadn't been given a choice. 1 year after Grandma's passing, I hosted a dinner, not a formal gala, not a fundraiser, just a meal, not for donors. Not for board members. But for the people who had actually loved her, fully, without conditions, without keeping score. I cleaned the house myself, polished the good silver, hung the old wind chime she adored back on the porch, just above the swing, where she used to sit with a mug of mint tea and a sharp opinion about the neighbors. There were no place cards. No assigned seats. No whispered politics or performative wine toasts, only chairs, real ones, and people who deserved to sit in them. Maria arrived early, carrying a tray of her famous lasagna and a soft grin. I made enough for an army, she said. Good, I told her. That's how Grandma liked it. Rachel came with baby Eleanor in her arms, wrapped in the same blue shawl I'd gifted Grandma that final Christmas Eve. Nathan showed up late but with sincerity in his step. A fishing hat tucked into his coat pocket like a quiet thank you. Even Lucas came. Grandma's nephew from California. My father's cousin. The man I barely knew existed until the foundation connected us. He brought old photo albums I'd never seen, filled with a side of my family untouched by bitterness. He pointed to a picture of my father holding a tiny me in the garden. Your dad was different, he said, eyes glossy. Didn't chase money. Just chased meaning. I like to think I inherited that. You did, he nodded. So did she. After dinner, we gathered in the garden. Just like Grandma used to host, simple, heartfelt, surrounded by lavender bushes and the occasional be too lazy to sting. Mr. Harrison attended too. He brought a bottle of cherry cordial, her favorite. As he poured glasses, he turned to me with a kind smile. You know, Amanda? I've seen hundreds of estates. Thousands of families. I've watched people tear each other to pieces for teaspoons and trinkets. I believe it, I replied, but I've never seen someone handle it like you did. I looked around the garden. The guests weren't the family I started with, but they were the family I chose to keep. You misunderstand, I said quietly. I didn't handle it. Grandma did. I just followed the trail she left. He nodded. Still, most people would have buried their heads or buried everyone else. You stood still and told the truth. I sipped my drink and stared at the fading sky. She made it easy to stay grounded, even when it hurt. Later that night, once everyone had gone and the candles had melted into puddles of wax on the patio table, I sat alone in the study. The house was quiet again, but not empty. Her presence lingered in every corner. Her voice echoed in the creaks of the wood floors and the way the light hit the china cabinet just right. I opened her final journal. The last entry was short. If Amanda finds this, it means she stood tall. It means she chose love over comfort. And if she's reading it, I want her to know this: I didn't raise her to be liked. I raised her to be brave. I closed the book, the lamp flickered, and I smiled. People always ask what it's like to inherit everything. They think it means power, money, control. They picture luxury. They imagine freedom. They assume peace, but they're wrong. What I inherited was something far heavier, and far more sacred: responsibility. A name. A truth no one else wanted to speak aloud. I didn't gain millions. I gained clarity. I didn't receive wealth. I received a mission. I didn't get even. I got better. Now I run the Eleanor Miller Foundation full-time. We serve hundreds of elderly individuals every year, some forgotten by family, others abandoned by systems too overwhelmed to notice. We give them warmth, advocacy, dignity, exactly what Grandma gave me. And every time I hand someone a scholarship letter or deliver meals to a quiet home where no one's knocked in weeks, I hear her voice, be the person I saw when no one else looked. And I try, every day. ITRY.SO, if you're watching this, if you've ever felt dismissed by those who claim to love you, if you've been called dramatic for standing your ground or ungrateful for daring to say no, if you've been left out of pictures, rooms, holidays, legacies, let me say this. You are not invisible, you are not wrong for wanting to be seen, you are not selfish for choosing yourself. The people who try to silence you will call it peacekeeping. It's not. It's convenience. They want the version of you that makes them comfortable to give them the version that tells the truth, even if your voice shakes, even if you're alone, even if they all turn away, because sometimes, the only thing more powerful than being chosen is choosing yourself. Running a foundation is nothing like I imagined. There are spreadsheets, legal compliance forms, endless calls with grant reviewers and social workers trying to navigate impossible situations with limited resources, but in between the chaos, something beautiful keeps happening. We make things easier for people who've spent their entire lives doing the hard things alone. We pay overdue utility bills for elderly couples who haven't turned on their heat in 3 weeks. We provide hospice volunteers for patients abandoned by family but not by dignity. We buy new eyeglasses for someone who lost theirs 6 months ago and didn't have the heart, or money, to replace them. Every single action feels like placing a brick in something grandma dreamed of but never had the time or power to build, and I don't just sign off on these efforts. I show up. Sometimes I deliver the groceries myself, sometimes I sit and listen while a former teacher tells me about the student who sent one card 20 years ago and never came back, and other times, I just sit, because sometimes presence matters more than productivity. 6 months into the foundation's operation, I received an envelope from my alma mater, the nursing school where I first learned how to hold a hand without letting go too soon. Inside, an invitation they wanted me to deliver the keynote address at their annual conference. The theme? Legacy through compassion. At first, I thought it was a mistake. I wasn't a researcher. I hadn't published books. I wasn't the kind of person who'd ever expected to be on a stage with spotlights and formal introductions. I was the person who quietly fixed blankets and adjusted 4 drips and made sure people didn't die alone. But then I remembered something Grandma once said as we sat under the magnolia tree in her backyard. The world doesn't need louder people. It needs steadier ones. So I said yes. The auditorium was packed. Hundreds of chairs, bright lights, and a silence I hadn't heard since her reading. My palms were sweaty. My notes crumpled. Then I looked up and saw Maria, sitting in the front row, wearing the pearl earrings Grandma had gifted her during one of their late-night chats. I smiled, took a breath, and began. A year ago, I stood outside a door that I was never supposed to enter. My name wasn't on the guest list. But it was on the will. My grandmother left me everything, not because I asked, but because I didn't. She taught me that compassion is louder than inheritance. That kindness leaves behind its own kind of wealth. The room listened. I talked about watching someone you love fade while others circle like vultures. I talked about how expensive silence becomes when no one speaks up for what matters. I talked about how legacy isn't defined by who gets mentioned in obituaries or who delivers the eulogy. It's defined by who remembers the scent of someone's tea, who learns the old family recipe without being told, who stays even when the room feels hostile. I ended by reading an excerpt from Grandma's last journal entry. There wasn't a dry eye, not even mine, when the applause came. It wasn't polite. It was thunderous, not for me, but for her. After the conference, everything changed. The foundation received national coverage, grant opportunities expanded, universities reached out to partner on joint initiatives. A tech company offered to fund the digitization of Eleanor's journals and documents to create a training module on ethical eldercare. 1 by 1. Doors opened, not because I demanded them, but because I carried her voice into rooms where it had never been heard before, and people listened, because the truth, when told without fear, has gravity. Then came the letter I never expected, from a boutique publishing house in New England. They'd read about the foundation, followed the coverage, listened to the keynote, and they wanted the full story, not just the court battle, their editor wrote, but the quiet war behind it, the private hours, the betrayal, the grace. At first, I hesitated. Writing it down felt final, permanent, like closing a door I'd spent a year walking through. But one evening, sitting by the fire in Grandma's favorite chair, I opened her journal again. There, scribbled in the margin beside a list of missing teacups and visitors who overstayed, was a sentence I'd never noticed. Tell the whole story, Amanda. Even the messy parts. Especially those. So I started writing. The memoir took shape slowly, not because I didn't know what to say, but because I wanted every sentence to hold the weight of what had happened, and what it had cost. It wasn't a revenge piece. It wasn't about retribution. It was about grief, and clarity, and choosing dignity when spite would have been easier. Each chapter centered on moments others would have skipped: a missed birthday dinner, a carefully wrapped scarf left behind, a text message not meant for me. The invisible shoves that tell someone, you don't belong here. But I stayed. That was the point, and so did she. Even after she left this world, Grandma lingered in journal entries and voice memos, in forgotten letters tucked behind vases, in the Way the floor creaked when you walked across the hallway barefoot at night. She stayed because she knew I would listen, and now, the world would too. The memoir launched quietly.no, press tours.no, billboards, just a softcover release through indie shelves and digital storefronts. Its title, The Quiet Chosen. The subtitle, When Love Leaves a Will. I didn't expect it to land on bestseller lists, but it did, and not because I was a celebrity or a media darling. It succeeded because so many people saw themselves in it, the forgotten, the underestimated, the caretakers with no thank you notes, the black sheep who were the only ones to show up when it counted. My inbox flooded with messages from strangers. I wasn't invited to my father's funeral. Your story helped me understand I'm not alone. I took care of my grandmother while my cousins planned vacations. She left me everything. I thought I was wrong for accepting it. This made me feel seen. Thank you. Those words meant more than any royalty check, because that was the whole point. This story was never just mine. It was ours, and yet, there was one thing left undone: the lake house, after the legal dust settled, after the foundation took root, after the book tour. I never planned to go on, it still sat there, quiet, untouched. Waiting. I hadn't gone, not once, until the first anniversary of her passing. I drove up alone, early spring mist curling along the roadside. When I arrived, the house looked exactly as I remembered. The porch still sagged slightly on the left, the shutters needed repainting, but the wind smelled like birch bark and memory. I unlocked the front door and stepped inside. Dust motes danced through the light. Everything was still. Except for the envelope on the kitchen table. I blinked. It hadn't been there before, but I recognized the handwriting instantly. One last thing. My chest tightened. Inside, a single-page note. Amanda, if you made it here, it means you followed through. You didn't let grief swallow you. You didn't let fear decide what was too difficult to face. This place, this silly old cabin with its drafty windows and creaky stairs, was always my favorite. Not because of what it was, but because of who I imagined would one day return to it. You. Not to keep it polished, but to keep it honest. Let it get messy. Let it hold birthday balloons and burnt pancakes and wildflowers pressed into books. Let it be real. That's the true inheritance. Not silence. Not wealth. But permission. To live loud. To stay soft. To choose love even when it feels like weakness. I didn't choose you because you were perfect. I chose you because you were brave enough to stay kind. And if you ever forget that, come back here. Sit on the porch. Listen to the wind. And remember who you are. Love always, Grandma. I pressed the letter to my chest, stared out the window, and exhaled. That night, I lit a fire in the old stone hearth. I made the snickerdoodles exactly how she taught me, yes, with the dash of pepper. I curled up with a quilt she'd stitched during a summer thunderstorm when I was 10. I played her favorite record, Scratched, and warbled from years of overuse, and I Saturday not waiting, not mourning, just being. If you've made it this far in the story, know this: sometimes you won't be invited, sometimes they'll pretend you don't exist, sometimes the door will close before you reach it. Walk in anyway, stand tall anyway, speak kindly anyway, because the world needs witnesses. It needs people willing to show up when no one claps. It needs stories like yours, not polished, not perfect, but honest. So here's to Eleanor. The grandmother who didn't just leave a will, she left a why. And here's to every Amanda out there, reading this, watching this, living it. You are not invisible, you are not disqualified by the silence around you. You are more than how they treated you, you are what you kept choosing when they didn't. If this story felt like a reflection of your own, I'd be honored if you left a comment below. Tell me where you're watching from, tell me what you're choosing today, and if you haven't yet, please subscribe for more stories like this one. Because sometimes, the quiet ones are the ones rewriting everything.